Assalamu alaikum, viewers. Today we are discussing the American situation and President Trump's possible implications of President Trump's possible decisions. We are joined by Waqar Rizvi. He is a career journalist who is working in Pakistan these days and has a very great following in Pakistan's youth. How are you, Waqar?
Doing very well, thank you. How are you doing?
Alhamdulillah. Thank you for joining us today. Uh,
I thank you for inviting me.
Straight coming to the question, if you see Mr. Trump's decisions, President Trump's decisions have cost him very much. And if we start from the first, he hasn't come out from the allegations that Russia helped President Trump in winning the elections. Secondly, his climate change policy has been criticized widely. Third, his attitude towards the US-Iran nuclear deal has cost America diplomatically very worse, if you see that. And thirdly, if you move further, the pressure of next presidential elections and the US-China Cold War, and now this COVID-19 pandemic. How you see that Trump possibly do to calm the situation and protests that are going over all over the America against the systematic racism?
There's a lot there, but I think that one of the things we need to remember is that Donald Trump just represents a system, right? So it's very easy for us to just blame Donald Trump. But it's a lot of these issues that we're talking about are issues that have been in place from a lot before Donald Trump as well. However, one of the interesting things about Donald Trump is that because he is not a career diplomat or a career politician, a lot of the things he says are not diplomatic and are not politically correct. So he says things a lot of the times, whatever comes to his mind, he'll just say. And the next day he'll change his mind and he'll change his mind publicly. You know what I mean? All of this is happening publicly. With a normal diplomat, with a normal politician, you have people who, they think about what they're going to say. They have their speech writers, etc., who tell them, listen, say it this way, so that tomorrow, if you need to change your mind, you can still do that. So systemic racism, for example, is not something new. It's not Donald Trump's fault. However, of course, he's made some statements that we know, of course, in the past about Mexicans and others being rapists, very, very, derogatory statements about them. And now when it comes to climate change, of course, yes, President Obama was much better than Trump when it came to climate change. However, you have to remember that within America, corporations, oil corporations and other corporations, fossil fuel corporations, all of these lobbies are very, very strong. So it's not like even under Obama, there was not pressure on him, even about climate change, or even before Obama, right? So all of these corporations have a lot of power within American democratic system even. They buy lobbying power, essentially, when it comes to any president in the White House. And we can go to any other issues really around the country. If we're talking about China or anything else when it comes to foreign policy, all of those are all about the establishment itself. So the one man, Donald Trump, is not making these decisions. It is the establishment making these decisions. And whenever they disagree with the president, they're going to ensure that the president knows that he cannot do that. So you will see that Donald Trump one day saying, I'll do X, and the next day when the establishment tells him no, then he'll say, okay, I'll do Y. And that's because, again, like I said, Donald Trump is not a career politician, so he doesn't know how to present himself properly to the public, which is both a good and a bad thing, right? Because at least he is more honest than other politicians in the US.
So how you see, what are the options left with President Trump to calm down the protests? Because we are expecting a second wave of protests, as the US has not seen these kind of protests since the death of Martin Luther King. And the attitude towards the American people's attitude is very aggressive. They are fed up of their administration. How you see that Trump has not able to empathize, or it is there? It's because of the pandemic going on. As you see that the significance of Trump's going to the bunker in the White House. Even he went for a short while, but he is the first president to do so since 9/11.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of pressure in the U.S. right now, domestic political pressure on the president to act both when it comes to systemic racism and the pandemic. So there are two things happening at one time, and that's adding a lot of pressure within the country at the same time. And of course, that's not an easy situation for any president to deal with. So even just on the pandemic side, we know, yes, Donald Trump did not handle it very well from the beginning, and we can point to many leaders around the world when it comes to the same issue. So it's not like Donald Trump is unique in that sense, in how badly he handled the pandemic. And to an extent, it can be argued that many of these leaders did not know it would be this bad. They might have thought that, listen, if we just deal with it, not too strictly, then we'll be fine. However, this pandemic is very serious, as doctors said, as WHO said from day one. Now, if we add on systemic racism, again, that is an issue which, as I pointed out in my first answer already, is an issue which the US has been grappling with for many, many decades. It's not a new issue. So yes, Donald Trump, he's still, that the jury is still out on how he will handle it. The initial signals that he's given have not all been good, of course, because you know that when he went to that church, he had protesters cleared from that area, Lafayette Square in Washington, D.C. And the way that those protesters were cleared, even the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff has had to apologize for going with Donald Trump to that church, that walk from the White House to the church. He apologized for even taking part in that. So has the U.S. Defense Secretary, saying that I should not have taken part in that it was not a good thing, that the way it was done. So you have even people within his cabinet now questioning whether his judgment about how he's presenting himself during these protests is good or not. Those things will be debated, of course, because right now the debate is also about whether the riots, the looting, all of those things are a good thing or a bad thing. I mean, the reasons behind it, there's a lot of issues within this system, right? But I think that, personally, I think it's a good thing that all of it's coming out, but we don't know how Donald Trump will necessarily reform the police, for example, because that's another issue which is coming up. And Democrats have already presented a proposal for reforming the police, but we don't know if Donald Trump's going to accept that. He's already said that maybe chokehold techniques are still a good thing if the officer feels that he or she is in danger or needs to subdue the suspect. So, I can go on and on. I can write a volume about this, but basically there are a lot of issues. So it's a lot more complex than just saying systemic racism should end. There are a lot of connected issues to that. And for a president like Donald Trump, who is not as experienced in politics, it's even tougher for him to handle the situation, I believe.
Thank you for the answer. Just moving towards our next question, that I would ask you to make a sense of our future, that by keeping in mind that if you analyze the American policies in recent years, somehow they have helped China grow economically. But after President Trump was elected, he applied a different strategy by reducing China economically and slowing down her progress, Chinese progress, and then adopting a containment strategy using military power. How you see this gonna turn up in future?
Well, a lot of people are saying, right, we have the New START treaty, which is about to expire with Russia in 2021, February 2021. And many people are saying that Donald Trump wants China to be part of the conversations about a new treaty, a new arms reduction treaty. But China is not willing to involve itself in that situation because that's a treaty specifically between Russia and the United States. However, yes, Donald Trump is obsessed with China in some ways. He wants to contain China somehow. Both militarily and economically. Now, one of the important things to remember, of course, is that the trade war has hurt both sides. Even the Chinese admit it has slowed their economy as well. And of course, militarily, we'll have to wait and see how that works. Will China be convinced to come to a deal with the Americans on military issues or not? We don't know right now. It's too early to say because those discussions have not yet begun with Russia. So will there be a trilateral agreement? At this point, like I said, China has not said it will sign up to that issue. However, it's very possible it will in the future if there's more pressure on it. Because of course you have to remember that China wants to grow and China has a very large population. So if the US continues to pile pressure on China, there's only so much the country can take before it may be forced to compromise in some way. This is the exact same thing that happened or at least that's what the US tried to do with Iran, right? Where it pressured Iran, kept sanctioning until, in the eyes of the Americans at least, the Iranians came to the table and negotiated. Of course, the Iranians don't agree with that. They say that that's not why we negotiated, but nevertheless, those are the realities on the ground, right? When your economy is affected, you make some decisions sometimes to compromise so that you can safeguard your own people, your own economy, as well as your own national interests, right? So you don't always get to do every single thing you want. And I think China also understands that. Even though China, of course, is a very, very large economic power, so it's not the same thing as Iran, certainly. But at the same time, the US and China can both hurt each other a lot economically if they choose to do so. And that would, of course, affect their political relations, their diplomatic relations, as well as their military relations, because we know the US is always sending Navy ships into the South China Sea. China sees as a provocation. There's the Taiwan issue, which is also very provocative. So there's many, many issues here. Hong Kong as well, of course, as you know. So there's many things that the Americans can also pick on to hurt China. And of course, there are things that China can do in response to hurt the Americans. But this would hurt both sides, as I said.
Thank you. Moving further towards the future of international organizations, this pandemic is calling itself for more international cooperation. But same time, the Trump's decision to cut funding of international organizations, and that could possibly raise complications in international regimes. And do you think China in this all scenario would be able to replace America as a global power, or its time has to see these things?
You know, one of the things that we're in a world right now where we have moved beyond the time when America was the superpower of the world, the only superpower in the world, right? Everyone says we're now in a multipolar world. So there was a time, yes, where America got to make all the decisions basically around the world and everybody listened. But now we have China, which is also a very big power. We have Russia, which is a significant power. And of course, there are other smaller powers around the world as well, which have significant influence on geopolitical issues around the world. Whether we agree with them or not, of course, is not the issue, but it's just a reality now that America does not have the same kind of power it once used to have. However, at the same time, America can still hurt us all in some way, right? So if America walks away from the WHO, that hurts all of us because, again, in the midst of a pandemic, we all need the WHO to be strong. And China, if we have any country that comes in and wants to replace the United States, that might be a good thing or that might be a bad thing, right? Because we need to always be careful that we don't want to just replace one person who was the policeman of the world with another person who is the policeman of the world. We want all of our respective countries to have their own national interests preserved, but we don't want one person or one country ruling over all of us around the world or to have all of the influence. So yes, it's a good thing that China so far has said we will give significantly more money to the WHO to make up for the funding shortfall because the US has walked away. However, at the same time, I think we all need to be cautious. We don't want to, again, like I said, replace one with another. We want there to now be a system in the world where most countries, or a lot of countries at least, are treated in an equal fashion, because that's been the major issue of the United Nations, right? Where we have the UN Security Council, we have veto powers in only certain countries' hands. And because they have the veto power, they get to rule over all of us when it comes to wars, when it comes to peace, when it comes to many, many issues. And that's created a lot of problems, right, for many of us. Of course, the solution is not easy either. I'm not saying that these are easy things to discuss or solve, but I think that having one power ruling over all of us also is a bad thing.
Thank you. Thank you, Waqar, for very thoughtful for this thoughtful conversation. And lastly, before saying goodbye to our viewers, I will request you to give a message to people of world about the COVID-19 and request them to follow the SOPs.
Well, yeah, no, I mean, I think it makes logical sense to follow all the SOPs, of course, when it comes to COVID-19, because this affects all of us, right? And from a political standpoint, certainly, I think this has taught many of us around the world, hopefully, that we're all very interdependent and we all depend on each other. So we cannot just be selfish at these times. So far, we've lived in a world where we've had a very good financial connections amongst the world countries, but at the same time, we need to realize that it's beyond just that, that we actually need to look out for each other, be it your neighbor just down the street, or be it other countries, your neighboring countries, even those countries you don't agree with, even those countries you see as adversaries. At times like this, you hope that humanity can move towards peace, right? As an anchor myself, I find it always very tough to talk about war and continuous death and destruction all the time, because you forget that those are human beings that are being affected. And now with the pandemic, we realize that this is something that we can all do something about. So following SOPs, of course, within our own societies, and at the same time, we need to pressure our governments to make peace with other governments around the world and to help other governments around the world, even if they don't agree with them on all diplomatic issues, because at this time is a time to show your humanity, not your enmity.
Thank you, Waqar. Thank you very much. Thank you, viewers, for watching this. Long live Pakistan.